Hi guys, welcome to this video series on building an inventory in Unreal Engine 4. We are going to be using the UMG widget system to build a visual inventory. We're going to be using the blueprint system to put together code. We'll go through step by step. This first video is just going to have a look at setting up sort of the visual elements before we get on to coding. So just to keep things nice and tidy, I've created a couple of folders. We've got a high level manager folder, which is where our game instance will go into. We'll get into that possibly in the next video. We've got a folder for our inventory itself, which is where all the inventory assets are going to go. And we've got a pickups folder as well. Now I've already imported some assets, an ammo pack and a health pack. We will obviously it'd be good if you could have your own assets in, be very helpful later on. So let's get to it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create user interface, right click user interface, widget blueprint. We're going to create a blueprint called slot WBP widget blueprint. Let's open this up. And for those of you who have not used the widget blueprint system before, this is your designer view. You have your palette where you add your widgets, your hierarchy where you can keep your widgets organized, and you've got your details on the right hand side. There's also animation along the bottom, but we're not going to be using that. So this is going to be the slot widget. So basically, we're going to kind of configure this as a button, which will then be loaded into the inventory itself. So this is really, the size of this is really too big for what we want. So we're going to go to the top right corner, fill screen. Let's just set it to custom. And we're going to make it a little bit bigger than the default, make it 200 by 200. We can now start adding our widgets in. So we're going to start with a button. Just going to click and drag that in. Rather than resize it like this, I'm just going to use the anchors option and use the bottom right just to set the corners to snap to the edges. We'll rename things as we go. So this is going to be slot button. On top of the slot button, we're going to need an image. That image is going to fill the button, so select the image, and in the slot panel up here we're going to fill horizontally and vertically as well. We can rename this as well, so this is going to be the slot image. We're going to need some text, so the text is going to just add that onto the canvas panel itself. The text is, we're going to change the color of it to be black first. Ooh, not the image, it's the text. There we go. And this text is going to have the item name fed into it, into the content. So for now, we're just going to make sure that we've got a block big enough to actually accommodate the writing itself. So that will be the item name. We're also going to need another image. I'm going to do kind of sort of a sort of notification style dot at the top, which will have the amount. So we're going to go to the brush and we're just going to, not bind, we're going to just create, add a reference in to the image that we need. So just out of my browser, I'm just going to import an image that I'd already done, notification dot. It is white at the minute, but we can change the tint. So I've got it selected, just go to tint, and I'm just going to make this sort of like a green color. There we go, and let's just set a size, so 50 by 50. There we go, just in that top corner there. So we're going to need some more text to go over the top, just so that we know what the actual amount is. So rename this text to amount text. I'm just going to change the value to 0 to start with, just so I can get an idea of roughly how big I need to make this box. obviously the amount is going to be bound, similar to the actual name. And there we go. So we've got our assets in. So let's have a look at binding. So binding is basically assigning data to properties of tracks through the use of functions. So we'll start with the slot button itself. We want to make sure that if we don't have any items in the inventory, that the button is inactive. So we're going to have a look under behavior and the is enabled property. So by default it is enabled. We're going to click on the bind and create a new binding. So this will take you into the graph. We can give, well, I'm going to change the name of the functions just so that I know what's what. This is going to be set enabled. What we're going to do is the button is, we're going to have an image on top of the text which will be populated by whatever the data from the pickup item is. So we're going to check to make sure that that image actually has an image being fed into it. And then we can use that, we can check if that's valid and feed that back into the return value here. So I'm just creating a new variable called item image. I'm going to make it of type texture 2D. I'm just going to drag that in and get, and I'm just going to run an isValid function just to see if it is valid. Then we will set the behavior to be enabled. So we can compile that. Let's jump back to the designer. The next thing we're going to do is the image itself, slot image. So we're going to go to the brush and we're going to create a binding for the brush. So again, let's just rename this quickly first. This is going to be set item image. And what we'll want is the item image itself. We'll get that. And we're going to use a make brush from texture. So you feed in a texture 2D, and you output a slate brush, which will feed nicely into that return type there. So compile that. Let's go back and let's have a look at the text. So this is the item name text. What we're going to do is on the content, we're going to bind this, and we're going to set its we're going to create a variable which will be item text. We'll call it item name text just to make sure we're not getting any duplicates, and let's just feed that directly into there. So compile that. Similar process for the number, the amount. We're going to go and create a binding for the text. What we're going to do for this one though, a little bit different. We're going to create, we're going to use a conditional check just to see what the value of current stack actually is. So we're going to get it first. We're going to check to see if it is equal to 0. We're going to run that into a branch. And if it is equal to 0, if that's true, we're just going to set the return value to 0. I'm just going to press Ctrl W to get another return node and just wire that false into there. And we're going to set, if it's not equal to 0, then current stack is going to be converted into text. The reason we're doing this is because if the current stack is equal to 0, i.e. we have no items, or we've run out of a particular item, that text will still show up as 0 on there if we just do a direct conversion. So we want to make sure that if it is equal to 0, that we're not outputting any text. So that will keep it blank if we don't need it. So compile that. Let's jump back to the designer, and the last thing to cover really is this little green dot here. So we're going to have a look down to the behavior section, and we're going to create a binding for the visibility. So create binding, and again we'll rename this so that we can see. So this is set visibility. Oh, not set visibility because that's already in use. So let's call it set.visibility. Just rename these as well. Set item name. Set amount text. Okay, so set.visibility. Same sort of thing. If item image is not valid, so we're going to run the same is valid check. Run that into a conditional check for a branch. If that is true, so if the item is valid, then we want to make sure that the little dot is visible. If it's invalid, then we want to make sure that the dot is hidden. So we'll set that to hidden. So compile that. Let's jump back to the designer. That's everything pretty much done for the slot. The only thing to do really is to make sure that things are anchored properly, so they display properly. So the text block along the bottom is going to be aligned to the bottom. The image, the notification dot is in the top right, so we want to make sure that that is going to be anchored to the top right, as is that text as well, just to make sure everything is nicely visible properly. So let's just compile that and save that, and let's quickly go and create another new widget blueprint. So this is going to be the actual inventory itself. So inventory WBP. Now this one is going to use the full screen dimensions. We're going to create a nice little overlay in the middle here. So we're going to start by adding a canvas panel. So we already have a canvas panel, but that handles the screen layout. We just want a canvas panel which is going to be for our actual inventory itself. So let's set this to be 500 wide, and we'll set it to be 450 high. And then what we'll do is we'll set its anchor to be the center, and we can make its X position -250 to center it directly, and we can make the Y position -225, and that will give us a perfectly centered inventory. So it's a little bit small actually, so I think what we'll do is we'll make that about 700 and make that -350. The reason I'm using the canvas panel is I want to have a background to this, so I'm going to add in an image on the canvas panel, and let's just make sure that we rename things as we go. So this is the inventory panel, and this is going to be the background image or background color, and we're going to set the color and opacity. I'm just going to set the opacity to 0.5. Press OK. And in terms of the anchors, we'll use the stretch to corners and just set that to 0 and 0. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a vertical box. Vertical boxes allow you to store information vertically, hence the name. So the reason we're going to use a vertical box is because we want to have, firstly, our inventory title on the top, and then we're going to have our grid of our slots underneath. So with that in mind, let's add the text first, and that will go into the first vertical slot there. We'll just put in the title inventory, and we'll make the text black, and we'll center it as well, and maybe make it a touch bigger. Let's make it 35. Okay, so the next section is to add our grid. Now there are two types of grid widgets. There's a grid panel, which allows you to create sort of arbitrary layouts, which might be cool if you want different sized slots. For mine, I want to go for a more uniform approach. So we're going to use the uniform grid panel. So you'll see it comes in quite narrow. It expands out once you start adding in your slots. So if you go back to your palette and have a look at the bottom under the user created, you will be able to see your slot widget blueprint here. So what we're going to do is just click and drag it onto the uniform grid panel. It's going to show up there on the top left. We're going to add another 5 of these just so that we've got 6 widgets, 6 slots, sorry, even. There we go. And what you'll notice is, even though we've added 6 in here, it's put them all at the same place. And that's just because when we add things to the uniform grid, it gives them all the same row and column number by default. So we're going to have to rearrange them in a second. So I'm just renaming each of the slots to give it a bit more of a readable number. You can see we're starting from 0 rather than 1 because we are using base 0 system, which we'll use in the array. Once we've got them renamed, just select one at a time and have a look at the row and column in the slot section. So slot 0 is fine. Slot 1 needs to go into column 1. Slot 2 needs to go into column 2. Slot 3 needs to go into row 1 and column 0. Slot 4 needs to go into 1 and 1. And slot 5 needs to go into 1 and 2. So they're all occupying their own space now, but they're not really displaying the way that we want. What we need to do is grab the uniform grid panel and then have a look in the slot rollout over here on the right. What we want to do is we want to press this fill button here. It's going to fill out all of the uniform grid to the very bottom. And then if we select all 6 of those slots there, we're going to do the horizontal fill and the vertical fill as well. So we get our nice box there. They are a little bit squashed, so I think what we'll do is we'll just grab the whole inventory panel and we'll just stretch it down a touch until they're all roughly square shaped. We'll probably just have to move that up ever so slightly. So 516, let's make that minus 258. There we go. Perfect. So that's our inventory set up in terms of visuals. We're going to have a look at creating some simple item menu that pops up and some other menus for tossing. But we'll wrap that up there for the first video.